when he's standing there saying these crazy things, remember that he's holding a little packet about the size of a playing card that has the codes to enough weapons to destroy the Northern Hemisphere.
And on the Michael Medved Show, it is always both an honor and a pleasure to welcome Tom Nichols, who is a staff writer for The Atlantic. He is also a professor emeritus of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College, where he taught for some 25 years. And he's also was an instructor at the Harvard Extension School. His books include Our Own Worst Enemy, The Assault from Within on Modern Democracy. Tom, this has been such a busy day and such a confusing day in many ways. I know you've been monitoring, like everybody else, the president's two big speeches, a big speech yesterday at the White House marking his completion of his first year as president in his second term. And then the big speech today, an hour and 40 minutes, apparently, at Davos. Did you get the indication at Davos, which apparently the stock market has taken very seriously, that President Trump is now ruling out using force against Greenland?
Well, for today, let's face it, the markets, grasp onto these. One of the reasons the markets are being whipsawed is that they grasp onto whatever Trump is saying, and they hope for the best, or they expect the worst. I mean, yesterday, as Trump was speaking about Greenland, the market plunged 900 points. They're hoping today that Trump, is now going to see the light and that he was just shooting his mouth off, as he is sometimes wont to do. I don't know what to believe. I think he's deadly serious about this. I've been arguing since last spring to take him seriously, in part because there is something, there is something about Trump that when you tell him he can't do something, he becomes determined to do it. He is like a small child with oppositional defiance disorder, that when you say, no, you can't have Greenland, he decides that he's going to have Greenland just to show you that he can. I'm more worried about the fact, and I don't know, I'm not a market expert, but I kind of wonder how this is being perceived. I mean, these two speeches yesterday and today really suggest a man who just isn't well, who is just, emotionally disturbed in some way. I mean, these are two of the grand total of about 3.5, 4 hours. He spoke yesterday for an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. Today, an hour and 40 minutes. And, who knows what his positions are? He was all over the place. He was rambling. He was mumbling. He was holding up pictures of immigrants in Minnesota. He said he wouldn't invade Greenland. And then he goes off into, confusing Greenland with Iceland a few times.
Three times he mistook.
It was kind of a, I think Americans ought to be very concerned about the condition of their president.
He also said that he had been originally planning to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Trump, not the Gulf of America. You caught that?
Yeah, and then, of course, he backed up right away and he said, no, just kidding. And then, of course, he backed up again and said, but wouldn't it be great? I think on that one, he was probably kidding, but the fact that he feels the need to slap his name in gold on everything, you can never rule it out 100%. Who would have guessed that he would desecrate the Kennedy Center? Look, John F. Kennedy, Michael, I'm from Massachusetts. John F. Kennedy, my mother loved him, not my favorite guy. We, as my father once said, we knew Jack and we knew what he was. On the other hand, putting your name next to a man who's on a building in part because the nation grieved for his assassination is just pretty weird stuff. So if he's going to do that, I wouldn't doubt the other things he wants to put his name on.
Well, it's also pretty weird. Like, I know you're a historian and you teach American political and national security history and the history of the armed services. Can you think of any previous leader who is alive and wanted memorials named after himself while he was alive?
Vladimir Putin doesn't do this stuff. I mean, Putin, when he first came to power, and some of us were still kind of, had a certain amount of optimism about him. One of the things that I thought was an optimistic line, he said, you shouldn't be putting my name on stuff and making little there have to be limits to cults of personality, and you shouldn't do that. Trump is anything that stands still long enough gets renamed for Trump. It's weird. I'm sorry, but it's not the sign of a healthy human being.
Well, the Institute, one of the things people have forgotten about is he renamed the Institute of Peace the Trump Institute of Peace, but this was after, under DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, they had stopped funding the Institute of Peace, right?
And also, it was always a kind of hybrid institution. It's not just an arm of the American government. That was back when he still genuinely believed somehow that he was going to get a Nobel Peace Prize, which is, again, one of his really bizarre obsessions. And he went off on that yesterday.
Well, today he said he deserved 8 Nobel Peace Prizes.
Right. Right. Why?
And that's for the 8
we
wars.
Shouldn't underestimate how much that's a function of the fact that Barack Obama had one.
Well, but it's also, when you look at, he's the only possible leader we could have who would bring peace between Albania and it was he meant to say Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Right.
Albania and Azerbaijan, which are not close to each other on the map and have never had a particular problem.
No, and he claims that Putin really, patted him on the back. Putin was just so amazed. Oh, for so many years we've been trying to do this. Putin created that war. Putin instigated that, by he put in Russian peacekeepers. He sent weapons. Putin has been manipulating the post-Soviet republics around him with this kind of intervention and keeping them at each other's throats. And to have the American president stand there and say, oh, I got such big kudos, for really, solving this problem that Putin couldn't solve. Putin didn't want to solve it. And it's not solved. It is tamped down for the moment, as are some of these other conflicts. And, Trump really didn't have very much to do with that, but he is obsessed with these.
Okay, and I have been obsessed since I read it with a piece you wrote in The Atlantic, for The Atlantic, about the military being forced to plan for an unthinkable betrayal. What is that betrayal? We will be talking to national security expert and professor emeritus Tom Nichols. More coming up. And on the Michael Medved Show, there is a fascinating and very disturbing, but very important column, piece, article in The Atlantic by our guest, Tom Nichols. And the headline, "The Military is Being Forced to Plan for an Unthinkable Betrayal." Okay, first question immediately that everybody wants to know is, what is that unthinkable betrayal? Let's think about it.
Donald Trump wants the U.S. military to plan for the invasion and seizure of sovereign territory belonging to one of our oldest allies.
Okay, how do we know that he really wants to do that?
Because you keep saying it, Michael.
Except today he said something different. He said he wasn't going to use force.
Well, let me just check my watch and we'll see how long that lasts. Because even as I point out in the article, even in the first week of January, even as Marco Rubio was, trudging up to the Hill to say, no, he means, peacefully, and he wants to purchase it, which, he should drop, because the Danes and the Greenlanders have said, okay, we heard you. We heard your offer. We're not for sale. It's never going to happen. The White House at the same time said, well, we're not ruling out the use of the military.
Okay, so this all goes to the controversy that came up involving the members of Congress who talked about the military having the right to not follow through on orders that are illegal. This does not involve that kind of situation, does it?
Yes, it does. First of all,
explain.
they have the right to refuse illegal. They have the positive duty to refuse illegal orders. And as long as Denmark is a member of NATO, first, let's just say that any major military action like this without the involvement of Congress is already pretty, of dubious legal quality. But invading and attacking a treaty ally of the United States not only violates international law, it violates domestic law. People forget that treaties are the law of the land in the United States. But that's really...
And they have been approved by vote in the Senate of the United States, those treaties,
correct,
right?
Ratified by the people through their Senate. But that's not really what what I was talking about with this betrayal. I think even just to plan for it, even just to consider it, I think requires military members to think about everything they have lived their careers doing, which is preparing to defend America, preparing to defend our alliances, preparing to fight on behalf of our allies together, shoulder to shoulder, as we did with the Danes in Afghanistan, where they shed blood right next to American soldiers fighting the Taliban. And then saying to them, okay, we now want you to proceed and plan as if those guys are the enemy, and we have to seize a big chunk of their territory. That is unconscionable, and it's a betrayal not only of the military and its traditions, but it's a betrayal. It's forcing the U.S. military to think about betraying everything they believe in and attack our friends rather than defend us from our enemies.
Okay. Meanwhile, President Trump today had one piece of his speech where 3 different times he talked about taking possession of Iceland.
Yeah.
And he clearly confused Iceland and Greenland, which is more difficult than ever. But that was just a mistake, right? Do we have new plans to take Iceland?
Sure. No, I think it's obviously a mistake. When he looks at a map, Greenland looks big and Iceland looks small, even though they are both extremely important parts of the North Atlantic security architecture. I think it shows that he is, he's losing it. He is not adept. His White House spokesman said, well, in the written text, it said a land of ice or something like that. Well, the written text, I'm sorry, but the president's draft speeches are not policy. What the president says is what the president says. With all that said, I think he made a mistake. But I will just say, imagine if Joe Biden had gotten up there and confused these two countries. He was run out of the presidential race, for one bad debate, a decision I supported, by the way. But Donald Trump makes these kinds of crazy mistakes every 10 minutes.
Okay. Meanwhile, in terms of making those mistakes, where are we going with all of this? Where are we going with Venezuela? What happens next? And is there a meaningful way that people can stand up to oppose some of the unpredictability and irrationality that is coming out of the White House?
Yeah, what would be a really important innovation here and something we ought to think about trying. Imagine if we had an Article 1 to the Constitution that actually required a legislature to be the source of the people's power and constrain the president. That would be a cool thing to try. Unfortunately, the Congress under Republican leadership functionally doesn't exist. Mike Johnson today, by the way, said, I didn't see his speech at Davos. I'm not following any of this. I'm sorry. If you're the Speaker of the House and the president's the leader of your party, and you're basically admitting that you're not paying attention to any of this, either you're bad at your job or you're intentionally hiding under your desk wearing noise canceling headphones so that you don't hear any of this stuff. I don't know how it ends. I think what's happening here, Michael, and this is just me trying to intuit the behavior of a very unpredictable person. I think this is still an emanation from the Epstein files. I think he lost that fight in December. Or November. He has been just absolutely seized with it ever since. He's lost court cases. He's losing public approval. The economy is not going the way he wants it to go. And like a lot of would-be autocrats, I think he's looking to engage in foreign adventures, hoping that each one of these produces a kind of rally around the president moment. And of course, that's not happening, and it frustrates him. So he moves on to the next one. It didn't happen in Venezuela. He doesn't really get a bump out of that. He decides that he's going to start threatening Iran again. That doesn't seem to get anywhere. So now he's going to seize Greenland. That is widely opposed by Republicans and Democrats alike. And so, what's the next thing he's going to try? I have no idea. But I think that's what he's doing, because I think his cognitive abilities are decaying quickly. And I think he is increasingly seized with a kind of megalomania where he is going to keep doing these things, convinced that eventually people will love him for doing that.
Well, he's going to lower the cost of drugs by 1,300%.
Yes, 1,300, which means every time you buy a drug, you get $100 back. No one's ever claimed that the man is good at math, but these are the kind of claims where he just, I think he cannot comprehend the fact that his own party turned on him about Epstein, that he's still freaked out about that, and that he still cannot understand why his polling numbers are in the basement. And he's increasingly turned, as you know, he's turned to blaming the American public. Well, they're just dumb. They don't understand how cheap eggs really are, kind of arguments. That gas
and again,
too
which
much a
he brought up
gallon.
at Davos, speaking to a World Economic Forum, Joe Biden, he has new proof that Joe Biden stole the election.
Yeah, yeah.
And not even the last election. It was the election two times ago, from 2020.
Right, almost 6 years ago, but we finally uncovered, we're looking for the real killers here, Michael, and we're going to uncover all of that proof. Again, I think the sign of a deeply unstable person. And I think people ought to be worried about that. This man holds the codes to 1,500 strategic nuclear weapons. At this moment, when he's standing there saying these crazy things, remember that he's holding a little packet about the size of a playing card that has the codes to enough weapons to destroy the Northern Hemisphere.
Okay, which is an awesome level of power. I'm very grateful for your two recent columns. The one about the military being forced to plan for an unthinkable betrayal, a betrayal which President Trump seems to have ruled out today, but then again, it is unpredictable. And then you have a second column, which is Trump is risking a global catastrophe. And yes, I think those nuclear codes are a good way of highlighting that risk. The most recent columns by Tom Nichols are posted on our website at michaelmedved.com. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is free. Just go to Michael Medved Official. Thank you for your contributions to this greatest nation on God's green earth.